Hello. So today we are talking about actually succeeding in law school. Joining with us today, Alison Monahan, who is the founder of not only the Girls Guide to Law School, which was my personal joy when I was navigating the process, but also, of course, Law School Toolbox, Bar Exam Toolbox. Alison graduated from Columbia Law School in 2006. She was a Kent Scholar, a Stone Scholar, and she was a member of the Columbia Law Review. She clerked for a federal district court judge. She has a wealth of experience in just navigating legal careers. She eventually went and she worked as a patent litigator at a large law firm in San Francisco before founding the Girls Guide to Law School. I'm really excited about this episode because we are going to get to hear from her a little bit about how she started a Girls Guide to Law School and Law School Toolbox, what she's learned over the years helping students succeed in their law school careers and their legal careers, and also the wisdom that comes from the fact that Alison has been in a variety of publications, including Above the Law, Bloomberg Law, About.com, LexisNexis, Miss JD, and a host of others. So if you haven't already, check out lawschooltoolbox.com where you can read all about Alison. And I'm really excited to welcome Alison to the show. So Alison, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, so I know I just gave a little bit about your bio and your background, but I'd love to hear from you kind of what prompted you to go on this journey, right? To go through law school in your career and then, start Girls Guide to Law School and Law School Toolbox. If you could just give me a little bit of background, that'd be lovely.
Yeah, definitely. Well, the reality is I have a really weird background. And if you had told me when I was in law school that I would end up running a business, I would have thought you were crazy. I would have said, no way. Like, I have no aptitude for that. I have no interest in that. Like, why? What? This is insane. Yeah. So basically, my undergrad was sociology. I was pre-med and decided not to go to law school, or sorry, not to go to med school. And instead decided kind of randomly that I was going to get a master's in architecture. So I
Okay.
did that. Yeah, obvious, right? So I did that and then decided I didn't want to practice and became a programmer, the next obvious choice. Right. So I did that for about 3 years. And then basically one day at lunch decided to go to law school and kind of applied and ended up in law school and was like, wow, okay. Yeah, so I actually really enjoyed law school in a weird way. We can talk more about that later. Um, yeah, and then, did the kind of clerking, big law thing, realized like many people do that maybe was not the best long-term life choice for other reasons. And yeah, so then I'd actually had the idea for writing a book for women in law school when I was in law school, kind of all the stuff that I wish I had known that no one had told me, all the things I found out, like working and in school and all these things. And that kind of got put aside while I was clerking, while I was working. And my friends were tired of hearing about it and basically said, look, why don't you either write this book or stop talking about it? And that's actually what became the Girls Guide to Law School. It never became a book, but it did become it became a website. Through that, I met my now business partner actually on Twitter, which is a little random. And here we are.
That's that's amazing. And
Yeah, like
I
that's something. I'm not
there's
sure
so
what that
much
is, but
there. I like that
yeah, there's a lot to unpack.
you've tried a lot of things, which is great. Because at least you never have that like, whoa, what if I had become a programmer? Or what if I had, studied architecture? I mean, I think most people don't actually explore all those different facets. And so I
Yeah.
think that's, really cool that you sort of ended up there. I'd love to know like what your favorite or maybe least favorite parts of law school were. You said you enjoyed it a lot.
I liked the intellectual aspects of it. I'm a person who likes sort of the puzzle, the game. When I took the LSAT, the logic games were actually my favorite part, which I think is a little unusual. And so for me, law school is all about like putting together these pieces, you figure stuff out and then you kind of explain it, which in a weird way is actually what design school teaches you. Um, this is a little spiel I gave a lot in interviews when I was interviewing for law firms and clerkships, but that's actually what you learn as a designer is sort of take all this information, make sense of it, and then use it and make sense of it in a way that people can actually understand. So I thought that aspect of law school was really interesting. Yeah, more so perhaps than the practice. I even liked the work practicing. I just didn't necessarily like the lifestyle.
Yeah, and I think that's something that when you talk about, writing guides for women, I know I also followed Corporate a lot, if you're familiar with
Yeah, definitely.
you
Love them.
like Corporate like got me through every outfit that I needed in my entire legal
Exactly.
career. I was like, can I wear blue shoes with this suit?
Like, exactly. Like, can you wear like gray, black, brown, blue? What should I wear? Can I wear like a loud shirt? Or, is that
Yeah,
allowed?
lots of questions about stockings. But I think it's
Exactly.
so helpful to have those kind of guides. But then there's really kind of a limit to what or how much you can guide someone when you're talking about big law, especially
Yeah.
women. It's like you can write all the guides you want, but then at a certain point the structure, I feel like, of big law is just not conducive to so much for men and women. But especially in our society, I think women end up taking more of the brunt of, I guess, the domestic and the family and even just the self-care aspects of it. So I think it's an interesting concept, like how much can you guide someone through a situation that is de facto untenable because of the way that it's structured.
No, I agree with that a lot. And I think there are a lot of these initiatives to make big law like friendlier. And it's like, well, the reality is the business model is not exactly set up to be like friendly for the people who work there. That's just how it works. Um, so I don't want to say it's sort of delusional to like, you know, kind of work around the edges with these things. But the reality is, and I think this is what I tell people about law school and about big laws, like you need to know what you're getting into.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing wrong with doing it for a while and like seeing how it goes. But I think if people go into it understanding the business model, and part of that business model is that most people depart fairly quickly, 3 to 5 years. I think something like 80% of associates have left. So that's just the business model. It's not a flaw in the system, really.
Right,
So I
right.
think, people think like, oh, I got this big law job, I'm set for life. It's like, that's not actually really how this usually works.
And
And
even
just be
in
aware
small
of that.
law, I mean, I guess
Yeah,
small law is not a term, but I went to a smaller law firm.
that's small.
It was women run. I'm still close to the women there, but I would say there's a lot of trickle down even from big law into
I'm sure.
smaller law firms. People are like, oh, a smaller law firm is going to be great for work life balance, and I'm like, no, because there's actually like less people working.
Also a fair
You don't
point.
have a
Yeah,
paralegal or an assistant or a secretary or
true. No, I mean, I joke because people ask like, "Oh, why'd you go into big law?" I'm like, I realized I needed FedEx. Like,
yeah, the little things.
yeah, it's like I needed people like doing things for me because like I was going to be working a lot. So I think there are pros and cons to all of these options, and I think it's just a question of being realistic about what you're signing up for, and then hopefully not being disappointed when it turns out to be kind of what you thought you were signing up for.
Yeah, no, I love that. What other advice would you give to future law school students, aside from, of course, go in with your eyes wide open?
Well, I think it's good to be open minded. I think sometimes people have this idea of like, oh, it's going to be so full and I'm going to hate it so much and it's just going to be so miserable. And I don't think that's necessarily helpful. I think, if nothing else, law school is 3 years of your life and it's worth it to try to make it, as nice of an experience as it can be. But the reality is, there are things you're signing up for when you go to law school. You're going to do a lot of reading, you're going to have high pressure exams, these things that again, if you are surprised at the end when you have a high pressure exam, I'm kind of like, well, have you been paying attention? Like, what did you think you were getting into here?
Yeah.
It's just like, okay. Like it is what it is in a lot of ways.
It's like the toddler touching the stove and then being like,
Yeah.
it's hot.
Like,
It's
oh,
like,
I got burned. It's like,
yes,
oh,
it's
law
hot.
school exams are stressful. It's like, yes, they tend to be. That is correct. It's just
Yeah.
it's the kind of a different world for people. Um, and I think, if you go into it expecting like a touchy feely, like everybody's going to be so supportive and every week you're going to get feedback, like that's not what you're signing up for.
No, I agree with that. I love that, going in with eyes wide open. I think it's interesting too because, as you're a businesswoman and I too have my own business, there is nothing predictable about being a
Right.
business owner, right? Like I can have the like eyes wide open and still be completely surprised by what happens. What do you think is the most interesting or valuable thing that you've learned since starting Law School Toolbox or even with Girls Guide to Law School?
Well, I think the most interesting thing, which I would not necessarily have expected about actually running a business, is that it's kind of great. I don't know why I didn't realize this earlier. Like I realized like I'm not a great employee. I'm actually, I think, a better boss than I am an employee because I was always that person who was like, oh, well, why don't we do this and be more efficient? And, the law firm's like,
That was
that's
me.
not really our business model.
That was me.
Like, yeah. No, like literally, I could tell you 10 different stories about times I was like, this is really inefficient. We could save a lot of time if we like implemented this easy process. And they're like, yeah, we bill by the hour. So I think, kind of being freed from that. And, we have a lot of processes. I'm sure you do too. Like, I want to streamline my business.
Yeah.
I don't want people doing things that are silly and wasting time and like everybody hates. Like, can't we get Zapier to do that? It's like, so I think it's just a different mindset. And it turns out, if you're running a business, you can run it any way you want. So you can like be nice to people. You don't have to be a jerk. So that's been actually very eye opening because I think I had like a kind of bad impression of like capitalism in a way,
Mm.
which is sort of weird that like now I'm a business owner.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, here we try to prioritize growth and like work that's energizing. And although I am not really that old, I do employ a lot of people who are actually significantly younger than me, like maybe 22, 23.
Well,
And so they're after college, but this is one of their first jobs, if you will. And so for me, I take that very personal, and I have a lot of responsibility. I want to help them grow and be better humans and build confidence. I'm like, I want to hear about their insecurities and how we can fix them. And that's like so very not corporate America. But
right.
I feel like it makes you a better employee when you feel supported and heard, like emotionally as well as the actual work. And, it's like the long game I like to play. But I feel
No,
like people, they're loyal to you then.
no, I definitely agree with that. I mean, one of the things we talk about a lot is like we want you to bring like everything to the table. And if there's a problem in your family life or whatever, you've got something going on, like I would rather know about that than not know, which I think is the total opposite of working in a law firm where you're just like you're hiding everything. I remember someone who had a new baby and she was back at work like a few weeks later and working until midnight. And I asked her one night, literally, I was just like, "How are you doing this? Like, literally, how are you functioning right now?" And she's like, "Oh, I just have to forget that I have a child." And I'm like,
Oh.
"That's awful." Thank you shortly thereafter, but
That's very
I was
concerning.
just like, I don't. I was like, I don't want to live like that. Like, that just
Yeah, I couldn't
doesn't seem like
imagine. I couldn't
um,
imagine.
no. So it just, I mean, it wasn't, it wasn't great.
Yeah, no. And I love this whole concept of bringing your whole self to the table. I wonder, pivoting a little bit to our listeners who, while not starting a job, they are starting 1L, some of them this fall. And so thinking about all of the resources that Law School Toolbox offers for first year students, what are some of those ways that you feel like students feel like either they can't bring their whole selves to law school, or what are some of the things that get in the way of their 1L success, and ways that maybe you guys have found that you can be helpful?
Yeah, this is such a great question because I think it is really hard for a lot of people to feel, in a sense, like they belong in law school. And I think that's some of what we're talking about is like, do you, with your entire person and who you are, do you belong in this space? And I think a lot of people struggle with this. Women in particular have a lot of imposter syndrome. Oftentimes, like first generation minority students, all these things. And, we hear this a lot from people of, I just don't feel like I fit in here. Like, I'm not sure I should be here. And I just feel like that's really sad. I mean, the most obvious response to that is, well, someone decided you should be here. So you have earned that spot. And that, in a lot of ways, if you're not that kind of standard law student, you probably had to earn that spot even more
Yeah.
because you didn't get to law school like the easy way. So, um, but I do think it's hard. I mean, I think affinity groups and things like that can be really useful for students when they're starting out or even like pre orientation, kind of finding those spaces of like, okay, these might be people I can identify with who can kind of help me along this journey. Um, but I think some of it is just like a mindset of like, I do belong here and I am going to take up space here. And if someone else doesn't like it, like, that's not on me, that's on them. Like, I have as much right to be here as anyone else.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what about, I know that you guys do some tutoring or you have some support systems in place to help students through that first year. How do you see that like working towards ultimately like success in your 1L year?
Sure. So we have kind of a pre-law like summer program called Start Law School Right. People can go and check it out on our website. That's designed really to help people get the skills and the confidence that they're going to need that first semester. So we kind of walk through the entire process of like reading a case, briefing a case, going to class. I mean, it's a video class, but taking your notes, like doing your outline, and then actually writing an exam answer and getting feedback on all these things along the way. And I think approaching 1L is like from a skills mindset is probably the most effective thing you can do. So you're going to get thrown into the situation. You're going to get all kinds of competing advice. But the reality is there are certain skills you have to develop to do well, right? I mean, this is not necessarily rocket science. You need by the end of the first year to be able to read a case and understand what that case says. And some of that is just vocabulary. You have to struggle with this like vocabulary from England in the 1800s or something. But you just kind of have to do that. And then you have to basically be able to learn the law and then use it. And I think it's that step of like between learning it and using it that can really trip people up, because that's kind of where the magic happens in law school. And that's how it's different. So if you've done really well, in undergrad, you basically read some stuff and then you kind of regurgitated it typically. It's a little different if you're like a hard science or something, but basically if you're like a poli-sci major, the test asked you like, what did this text say? And you wrote down what it said and then you got an A. And that's not really what law school is. So I think making that step between knowing the information and being able to apply it and use it and write about it in a coherent way is really where that's what law school is. That's what thinking like a lawyer is. And so what we do one-on-one is for students who want some extra help is actually help them with that process, make sure they're doing practice questions early, getting feedback and that kind of thing. Because I think that's so important, whether you work with a tutor or not, is do that practice as soon as possible, like a few weeks into the semester even, and make sure that you're focusing from the beginning on the exam.
I love that. I didn't even know when I was in law school that there were tutors for law school, which
Right. I
surely
didn't know
could
that
come in
either.
handy for legislation and regulation. Oh my goodness, I don't know what that man was saying to me.
Yeah, I don't know anything about con law at this point still. Like my professor was 90 plus years old and was an absolute legend of the field, but should not have been teaching one else.
Fun fact, they have since changed this, but when I was going to school, Harvard was the only school that did not require con law. So I never took con law.
I did not know they changed. I knew that was the case. I did not know that they had changed it, which is probably good.
Yeah, I think we had a new president. He was like, what is happening here?
Kind of bizarre. I mean, I also like Harvard con law, like kind of seems like something people might need to know if they're going to be politicians and things like that. I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
just saying.
No,
Kind of important.
I was studying for the bar and I was like, so I'm just gonna learn it for the first time, I suppose. And we'll just
Yeah.
we'll see how that goes.
We're like, it is an MBE topic. You do kind of have to need to know some things about it.
Yes. I learned a lot of things for the first time for the bar, which actually I wanted
Totally.
to ask you. So studying for the bar for me was like pure hell. Would not do it again. Would not wish it on my worst enemy. I just, it happened. I'm glad that I passed, but we can't go through that again. And if it were
Yeah.
not for Barbary, I would not be a lawyer. But I also know, like, I just wouldn't. There's really no other way to say
Fair
it.
enough.
If I couldn't watch videos on 2 times speed to catch myself up from where I was supposed to be, it's actually funny. I listened to one of my videos on regular speed once, and I was like, "Wow, is that what your voice sounds like this whole time?"
Oh,
Um,
how funny.
'Cause I just
Yeah,
like
people tell
knew.
us they write in because yeah, like, oh, I listened to the podcast at like 1.5 speed. I'm like, we must sound really bizarre.
It's just a different voice. You just get to know a different
Yeah,
voice.
exactly.
So but I wanted to know because I know that you guys also offer bar prep. You guys have a lot of things that
We
you're
have a lot
really
going
like
on.
doing the Lord's work, getting people through school and practicing. Talk to me a little bit about how your bar prep works. How is it different from Barbary? Would you recommend people get a private tutor for the bar exam? Just all your thoughts there.
Yeah, definitely. So, most of the people, probably like 80%, I would say, of the people we work with on the bar exam toolbox are people who have failed the bar. So, they did Barbary, Themis, Kaplan, like one of those courses. It didn't work. And so now they're sort of reevaluating and saying, okay, what do I need to do to pass the bar? And I don't have a problem with any of those courses. I think all of them have great materials. The information you need to pass the exam is absolutely 100% in these course materials. It's just that for a certain percentage of people, it doesn't really work. And so they come to us really for more of like a one-on-one approach of like, all right, typically we have their score reports at that point. We can say, well, you did well in this part, you didn't do so well in this. Doesn't look like you know anything about con law based on your, MBE scores, maybe something you need to work on. And so we really work with them more intensively, kind of one-on-one. And in some cases, we work with students who are taking the bar for the first time, but typically that's going to be someone who knows for some reason that they're going to need extra attention. Maybe they have ADHD and they've always gotten accommodations and they know they're going to need more time to study. Maybe they've struggled in law school, particularly the first year. That has a pretty good correlation, unfortunately, with not passing the bar. So, I think we work with people kind of in a variety of circumstances. A lot of people are working and studying. And so that, 40-hour a week type Barbary thing just isn't going to cut it for them necessarily. So we kind of try to figure out like, all right, what do you personally need to pass the bar, and then work with them to help them get there.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's always been so interesting to me. I took out a bar loan because I was told to, so that I guess I could study for the bar and not
Right.
work. But just the like way that is assumed and set up that you will just be able to be basically unemployed for a few months while you spend all of your days studying for the bar is really a privilege that not most people have,
Yeah.
truthfully.
I mean, I didn't do it. I mean, I ended up taking two different bar exams. The first one I took was in Massachusetts, where I was clerking, and I kind of pre-clerked at a law firm for 6 weeks, I think it was. So that was enough money to kind of get me through the rest of the summer. But it really meant that I didn't start seriously studying for the bar until, July,
Wow.
essentially. So, I mean, at that point, Massachusetts had a 90% pass rate. So I was pretty sure I was going to pass. I was like, well, 5% of those people are going to get sick or not show up. And then, okay, I've only got to beat like 5%. I can probably handle that. I'm good at multiple choice. Yeah, and then I took California while I was working, and like another total nightmare.
Oh my
Like
gosh.
I'm in big law. Like, when am I supposed to study for the exam? So
Yeah.
again, got like 3 weeks off, and basically, like, I'm sure I barely passed California. I'm shocked actually that I passed California, but I did pass. Unfortunately, they don't give you your score, but I'm pretty sure mine would not have been very good.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I knew a couple of people while I was clerking who had to retake the bar. And you could only get a couple of weeks off if you're, I mean, even
Yeah,
that is a lot if you're clerking. If your judge loves you, you could get 1 or 2 weeks off to study for
yeah,
that bar.
which
But
is not a
otherwise,
lot.
no, I mean, not considering the fact that, they tell you, oh, you can't work while you're taking the bar exam, while you're studying, you need 8 weeks off or whatever. It's just it's an interesting setup for sure. And then probably there's
It
many
is.
think pieces I could think about or write about on like the correlation of that with socioeconomic status and who's passing the bar or not.
No, I think that has a lot to do with it. I mean, if you kind of don't pass in that first, like, oh, you've got 2 months and then that's it, you, life gets more complicated after
Yeah.
that. People are working, they've got kids. Like, there's just a lot of circumstances that then make it much, much harder to have that focus. So I don't know. I mean, I think honestly, the bar exam is a fairly silly way to evaluate lawyers, but no one really
Yes.
asked me. So, it is what it is. You have to pass it at this point, maybe 5 years, 10 years, maybe not. But, right now, if you want to be a lawyer,
Yeah.
unfortunately, you have to pass. And it's just such a barrier for so many people. And I think that's really sad.
No, I know fantastic people who unfortunately have not passed the bar or not been able to after numerous attempts who would have made fantastic attorneys.
Yeah,
Um,
and it's just one of those things where like, what does a multiple choice question have to do with whether you can like do a client interview?
yeah.
Nothing. It has
Never,
nothing to
never
do with
will you have
anything.
to make these time decisions. I wonder a
No, I
little
mean, you would be
bit.
committing malpractice, like
Yeah.
literally.
No, absolutely you would. I wonder a little bit about, we've talked about 1L tutoring, we've talked about the bar prep. Both of these are exam focused prep services that you guys offer at Law School Toolbox, but I know that you also offer maybe more of a like softer skill. I know that you work with students as they're preparing for on-campus interviews if they are thinking about going to big law. Some more other like career defining moments. I think you guys also help with Ride On. Like, talk to me about a little bit about those services and just what you think people need to be successful. And for those of you that are listening, it might be like a little bit confusing because you would think that, sure, the bar exam and then maybe you would interview and get a job. But in law school, for some reason, most of your on-campus interviews are after your first year and then before your second year, and then you kind of that you're interviewing for the summer. But if you're going to a big law firm, barring any kind of shenanigans, you are probably going to get an offer, and that is where you will be after your third year, and that company will actually pay for your bar exam. It's a little backwards. So that on-campus interview that happens after your first year, usually like your first year grades are very important for that reason, but there is definitely a level of networking savviness, finesse that goes on that kind of sets up the rest of your legal career. I did not do on-campus interview. I definitely almost did. I knew that I didn't want to go to big law, but somehow almost ended up at OCI anyways. Just lots of peer pressure, career services pressure, but I resisted. But I would love to hear from you kind of what you think makes students successful in that process, what they should be thinking about. And even I know that some students do interview for big law jobs after 2L year instead. So kind of how to be successful throughout law school in preparation for your career.
Yeah, definitely. And if people are kind of listening to this being like, what in the world is Sydney talking about? We have a podcast at the Law School Toolbox. It has some basics of like, what is OCI? Like, what is a callback? All these things. You can go listen to that. But basically, again, I think you've got to understand what you're getting into. I think it's great that you were able to resist that pressure. I know so many people where I was at school at Columbia who came in saying, "Oh, I'd never do OCI, like never. I don't want a big law firm." And then you saw them on day one, like in their little suit, and you're like, "Oh, what happened?" Like, well, I'm just gonna, do a few interviews and like see how it goes. But the reality is, the more you get into the process, the harder it gets to back out because, like, you just do a few interviews and then you just get a few callbacks and you just do the callbacks, and then, oh, well, I mean, what's the harm in being a summer associate? They pay a lot of money, so suddenly you've gone totally off track on this path that you never intended to be on. And there's a ton of pressure at these top schools to kind of go that route. And with OCI, I mean, it really depends, let's be honest, on like what school you're at. So, they're top schools where there's tons of pressure. And if you want a big law job, you probably will get one. Like most people who go through OCI at Harvard or Columbia or wherever, they get at least one offer. And then there are other schools where that's not the case. And you really have to be kind of top of your class and, like really gunning for it to make it happen. And so I think people just need to be realistic about which one of those scenarios they are in. And then if that's not something that's probably going to be on the table, you've got to sort of start thinking early, like, well, how am I going to position myself for something else? And there's nothing wrong with doing something else. But you are probably going to, the process is not like a little box where you like just show up in your suit and then 2 weeks later you have a job offer. So we kind of help people like really at all stages of that. Either people who want a big law job, but maybe, they're not sure about their interview skills or they have other things, their grades aren't great, all the way to like, I don't have any interest in this and there's another type of job I'm interested in. So it's pretty interesting to kind of meet people like all along the way. And sometimes people are considering all kinds of things. They're not really sure like what's possible, what's not. So, I mean, law is a very weird hiring market, let's be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that there are people who always ask me, so I'm going to ask the question to you. But Allison, I go to ranked, maybe ranked 100 or 95 law school, and I have I don't know, 3.3, so I'm not failing, but I'm not at the top of my class. But I'd really like to go to a big law firm. Is that even remotely possible?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, there's no harm in applying, particularly in like your local market. But again, you've got to kind of be realistic that maybe you start someplace else and kind of work your way into big law. And I definitely have friends who have done this who, were absolutely brilliant lawyers. And in one case I'm thinking of is one of the few people who continues to actually be a lawyer, way down the road. And she's absolutely fantastic, but she went to a school that was in a totally different part of the country from where she wanted to be. And she went there because she's a foreign student and basically needed the scholarship that they gave her. And she did really well, but everyone in San Francisco was kind of like, I don't know. Like, we don't really know anyone from this school. Like, where is it again? And so she had to start in a smaller practice, and basically over the course of probably like 5 years, worked her way up into a big law firm where she was very successful. So I don't think it's off the table, but I think you just have to be realistic that probably with that GPA coming from that rank of a school, unless you have some type of really strong personal connection or something, it's probably not happening straight out of the gate.
And I love that you said that because I always tell students, students are like, I have to go to this top school or I won't be able to do this career. And I always say, you can do a lot of things from a lot of schools. It just might not be your first job out of law school. But just because your first job out of law school is in Skadden doesn't mean that you can't, if you really want to, work your way to Skadden. Like, there's lots of paths.
Yeah, and the reality is, like we talked about, if I'm a summer associate at Skadden and I start there as a first year associate, I'm probably gone in the next few years.
Yeah.
Like, that's just not a long-term career path anyway. So someone who does, say, like government work, and then they end up in, an area where there's demand from law firms, like they can transition into a law firm and probably come in a much higher level where the pathway to being something like a partner or counsel is actually a lot more straightforward. So yeah, I think people sometimes think like, oh, it's all about the first job, and it's really not. You can always change course. You can always position yourself to do something else, and if you're strategic about it, you may even end up in a much better place.
Yeah, no, I do love that because you're probably not as burnt out.
Right, and it's something you've actually like committed to. You want to do this, not just like, I mean, when you go into big law, it's like, oh, like, are you corporate or litigation? And you're like, well, I flipped a coin, I'm litigation. It's like you're not like committed to that.
Yeah,
But if
yeah.
you've had, say that you worked, as like a public defender or DA or something for a few years, and then you go into white collar criminal work, like you actually know something, you've done things, this is where you want to be.
Yeah, because you don't really know a lot when you're first year. You don't know anything when you're a first year associate. So
Nothing. Yeah.
nothing.
You're just totally making stuff up. Like, you don't know anything. Everybody knows you don't know anything. You're like saying these things. I mean, I remember going into like first year and they're having cocktail parties. Everyone's like, oh, what area of law are you going to practice? I'm like, well, and I'm thinking maybe like appellate litigation or con law. Like, I barely passed con law, like I knew nothing about con law.
I love that. I remember
So people just meet. Yeah, go ahead.
I remember exactly what it was that almost made me go to OCI. There was a girl who told me that her firm had paid for her to fly first class to a Beyonce concert. Ooh. And I was like, oh, well, if I summer, like, I too could see Beyonce. Like, I was like, it was like, these are not why you should make decisions. But I was like, seriously sitting here and I was like, you could live the best summer of your life, Sydney. Why would you not go this route and see Beyonce?
I mean, to be honest, I picked my 2L summer firm because they agreed to let me do part of the summer abroad, and I thought that sounded great. It was not a good fit. It didn't go well.
But it's the allure of the perks.
Yeah, I was like, but I did get to go to really fancy lunches in London, and that was fun.
Yeah. I absolutely love that. I want to know if you could tell us if you had like just any other kind of advice for students, whether they're specifically women or marginalized students, as they are thinking about being successful in a law school, as someone that has had also a variety of legal experience yourself, like practice experience, if you have students that are listening and they're like, I don't fully know what I want to do yet with my law degree, but I'm going this fall, but I'm trying to figure out, I don't know any lawyers, I want to be successful. What other pieces of advice do you have for them in that path?
I think I have two pieces of advice. One is to really try to talk to people. And like, I hear you on like, I don't know anyone personally. But people are actually really willing, I'm surprised, to do informational interviews. I have a whole series on like how to set up an informational interview with somebody on the Girls Guide to Law School. We can maybe like send the link out or whatever. But people are surprisingly receptive to like someone who's actually authentic, reaching out to them and saying, hey, I've looked at your background and this is my path. And I would be really interested in just, asking you a few questions. Like, is that possible? Can we have coffee if you're in the right area or whatever, phone call, even email? Because I think getting advice from people who are doing what you think you might want to be doing and actually really listening to it is a great option. The other thing I would say is try to get involved with something hands-on as soon as possible in law school. So whether that's a pro bono case where you have an actual client that you may be working with, or later on a clinic or something like that, or even just volunteer work. I think, at least for me, and I did some stuff with the Bronx Family Court, like my first semester, because they're happy to have you. I didn't know anything, but for me, it was really useful to understand that, like, okay, even though I don't know anything, I'm still in this position where I can help this person and get information for them and get advice for them in ways that they can't do on their own. And I think that made me feel more kind of like, oh, I actually am bringing value to the table here, even though on a day-to-day basis, I might just go into like torts and be like, oh my gosh, I'm such an idiot. I have no idea what's happening. But then you talk to this other person who's like, well, how do I deal with this situation? You're like, well, I don't really know, but let me like email a family law professor at Columbia and like see if they have some ideas. So I think it's really useful just to kind of get your feet wet and start doing something to see what you actually like.
No, I really do like that advice. I feel like the law is so much an apprenticeship based career.
Definitely.
I thought that I would be, I mean, I practiced family law, so I didn't stray that far, but I was convinced I would be a child advocate. In Maryland, it's, I guess it's not really a best interest attorney, but more so like the child's attorney in a child welfare case. And I was like, this is it for me. And then I realized how much bureaucracy there was, and red tape, and actually how little power I really felt like I had. And that I wasn't a best interest attorney. I was advocating for what the child wanted, which honestly, half the time was not really the best interest.
Their best interest.
Well, a 7-year-old knows but so much, right?
Right.
The 7-year-old might very much want to go someplace that maybe the 7-year-old should not want to go. Not that
Right.
all children don't know what they want, but oftentimes I would find myself wanting to find a different solution that was not on the table, and that was kind of not
Right.
what we were charged to do in our position. And I feel like, it's kind of like what you said, you don't know until you do it. And then I was like, well, and then I realized, oh, divorce is not actually as like grimy as I thought it was. It can have its rewarding moments as well. No one says that about divorce attorneys, but actually it can be very rewarding.
I'm sure. No, when I was like trying to figure out what I was going to do after I left the law firm, I mean, you mentioned I was a patent litigator, and I decided I was going to go be a family lawyer. And I even like talked to this solo practitioner who was really successful, and she was like, "You should do this." I'm like, "I should do this." And I'd actually met her via a pro bono divorce case I took on, which was totally strategic. I wanted to meet her. It was great. Everything was going smoothly. And then I started doing this case, and I was just like, oh my goodness, this is probably not for me. I was used to being in federal court, and suddenly I'm in like state court where they've got like a traffic cop who's like sitting in for the judge. And, I was just like, this is insane. Like we were never even served. How can we have a hearing on this?
It's the Wild West. Family law is the Wild
They're
West.
like, everybody's here. Yeah, we're all here. Let's just have the hearing. I'm like, I literally have never seen these papers before. Like right now, they're like, "Well, take 10 minutes, go talk to your client." I'm like,
yes,
this is like fundamentally life changing. Like, are you insane? And
that is exactly how family law is. It is literally the Wild
crazy.
West. There's like some thrill to that, I will say, because it's like rules. What rules? Who needs rules? We're here. We're here. We fly by the seat of our pants.
Figure it out.
Not everyone even needs an attorney. You have an attorney. You don't have an attorney. Whatever. We're here. Let's do it.
No, this case dragged on for 3 straight years. There was like nothing to divide up. Like they had no property. It was just like, this is insane. Like, I mean, but like I did it. At least I tried it, and I knew after that this was not for me.
Yeah, and I think that's like one of the greatest pieces that I think of your advice is like, just try things, get your feet wet, do them, because you can build up so much in your head what you think the law is, what you think your life is going to be like as a lawyer. I know it's probably because neither one of us practice law anymore, but like, I think that it is helpful to get that practical experience, to know what you like, what feeds your soul, what you enjoy, and what conversely you just thought you would enjoy, but you don't actually enjoy. And that's okay. I always tell students, like, I like my students to know why they're going to law school, like to really have a focus. I like to say you can change your major, quote unquote, when you get there, right? Be open to other areas of law, but let's go in with a major. Let's not go in undecided, because I just think it gives you a little bit more focus. Law school goes by quickly, but I do think that there is something to be said for the fact that you will have your mind changed and open when you get to law school. And it's okay if you've told everyone and your mom and your dad and your whole church that you're going to do this one specific area of law for like the last 10 years of your life, and then you realize you don't like it. Like, that's okay, right? I told everyone I was going to be a lawyer since I was 8, and here we are.
I mean, you technically are a lawyer. You're just doing other things with that law degree. Yeah, and I think, very little is irreversible. You can always change paths. And I think sometimes in law school, particularly, there's this idea of like, it's so important, like everything's so important to get right the first time. And like when I look now, like looking back, people in my class are doing all kinds of things that like I never would have thought they were doing. And the people that you thought were going to be like total rock stars at a law firm, like survive 6 months and now they do something else. And it's pretty normal.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Alison, this has been really, really helpful. I'm hoping that it's helped give people some practical advice about what to think about as they're embarking on their law career, their law school career, or even as they're coming out of it. I would love for you to just tell us a little bit more about how people can get in contact with you and the different services that you guys offer and where they can follow you on social media.
Sure. Well, first off, thank you so much for having me. This has been really great. So people can find us through our websites, which are lawschooltoolbox.com, barexamtoolbox.com. There's the girls guide to lawschool.com. The career stuff is careeraddicted.com, .com. And social media. So we are probably most active on Instagram, actually, which is Law School Tools. I think we have some old Facebook accounts floating around that we post to. Ironically, Twitter is something I haven't used for really years, but the Girls Guide account still does exist. But yeah, I think Instagram is probably the best place to find us on social. And like I said, we have a podcast for the Law School Toolbox and the Bar Exam Toolbox, and those are all linked to off our websites, and also you can find them wherever you get your podcasts.
Awesome. And just a quick rundown of like the different ways that you serve students so that they can.
Oh, sure. Sorry. I keep forgetting to talk about how you can actually pay us. So we have the Start Law School Right program, which is a summer program you can do before you start law school and kind of see like, how it's all working for you. We also do one-on-one tutoring in law school and for the bar exam. And then we do the one-on-one career work as well.
I love that. We'll also make sure to link all of that and direct people your way. I love that you guys do all that tutoring. I knew about Girls Guide to Law School actually way before I knew about Law School Toolbox. And I had been searching because so many people ask me, and I, cannot tutor anybody on, you don't want me as your tutor. But people ask me, like my students, they'll go to law school and they'll be like, Sydney, like I need a tutor. And I'm like, okay, let me try to figure that out for you. And then I ended up finding all of your tutoring resources and I was like, oh, I know her and her other sites. And you guys do have an extensive resource of tutoring. And so I was overjoyed to have found that resource because now I can stop twiddling my thumbs and be like, I don't know where to send you. And it can be like, here's a lovely resource for you to get tutoring.
Well, we are happy to take care of your students for you. And also if people want to see what our tutors look like or their bios or things, that is also all on our website. We try to have a really broadly diverse selection of people, ages, everything. So you can always, kind of pick your favorite if they're available.
Awesome. I love that. Well, Alison, thank you so much. And we can't wait to have you back on the show one day.
My pleasure. I would love to return. And thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. Take care.